Shalom, friends, shalom. Blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times. Real quick, going to, of course, stall for a little bit of time to try and get a little bit of the audience here. If you are here, of course, thank you very much for showing up. Please do consider subscribing if you have not done so. Hit that bell in case you want to get notified for every time that we actually go live. Hit that like button, get this shared, of course, get it out to all the different social media platforms you happen to partake in. Of course, what good is a message without an audience to hear it? For newcomers, this is not apologetics work. This is my Watchdog podcast. Watchdogs are a news broadcast that obviously takes heavy influence from my Christian faith, but is not itself strictly an apologetics podcast or anything like that. It doesn't have to do with my debates, doesn't have to do with any of those religious knowledge stuffs per se. We talk an awful lot about, what I think the Christian ethic is, Christianity and politics, kind of evangelizing conservatism in a way. But it is nonetheless different podcasts. So if you're here wanting my apologetics stuff, that's actually unapologetics and or my open rooms of debates, definitely go ahead and check those out. You can obviously stay here and check this out, though, too. I certainly don't have any sort of an issue with that. And, of course, if this is the video that you're actually here for, trying to listen to some of your boys' political commentaries, then you have, of course, come to the right place. On that note, want to announce something really quick. We were supposed to have more discussions about this yesterday. For whatever reason, it did not end up occurring. I never ended up getting a message, but I'm sure that whatever it is, it was something either important or just a miscommunication, which potentially could have been. I mean, who knows? But the point is, me and Brother Nicholas Whitmer, who many of you guys may remember. If you don't, that's perfectly fine. Friend of mine, friend of the channel. We've been discussing. And we have come to a decision. His advice, of course, and in the end, it was my ultimate decision being my channel, but under his advice, right, we have come to the decision that we think it might be a good idea for the Watchdog to be rebranded. What do I mean by that? So, number one, it's probably going to get its own channel here pretty soon. What I'll probably end up doing is I will have watch parties on this channel while I'm sort of phasing out Watchdogs, right? And therefore trying to start up the new channel, right? And there's a couple reasons why this really needs to be important. Number one, people are really starting to associate my name with apologetics, right? And my title here, The Synagogue, with apologetics. And I would like them to be able to search synagogue and find what it is that they are looking for, namely apologetics, right? I obviously have done political debates and political conversations and interviews and stuff like that, but they're not nearly as popular at the moment, even though they are a little bit longer running and even though I have talked to a little bit higher ranking people, right? So that's the first major reason to get everything shifted. The second thing is, of course, the topics are pretty different, right? It'd be one thing if I had a philosophy and then a history, and then a apologetics podcast all on the same channel. Those are all very interrelated. Politics, not necessarily, right? It's kind of like how if you have an entertainment channel, but you tend to focus on media like movies and books and comics and video games and stuff like that. Yeah, sports is entertainment, but does it really go on that channel? Answer, of course, is no, right? So that's another reason why we potentially might end up switching and getting the Watchdog onto a different channel. Of course, if we do that, right, which is likely going to be the case at this point, y'all will be informed. We'll have like a month of Watchdogs where I'll be hosting a watch party here on the Synagogue YouTube channel, and basically trying to say, hey, if you're here for the, excuse me, I just kind of lost my train of thought. If you're here for the Watchdogs, this is actually a watch party. We move this over to a new channel, move over to that channel. But that way, if you're here for the apologetics, you can still stay here, listen to my apologetics, stuff like that. I do see Dan Straight, Spooky, Bed Hair up in the live chat. Thank you guys very much for showing up. I appreciate you being here with us today. Another thing with the rebranding is the logo is going to change a little bit. Not much, just a little itty bitty bit. So we're still going to keep the yellow background, the yellow font, the black background behind the yellow circle, which is supposed to kind of represent both a spotlight and a button. We're still going to keep the Rorschach motif on the dog, where he's got the Rorschach mask on, as well as the fedora. The actual difference we want to make here is actually the species of dog. Number one, the show is called the Watchdog, so it would make a lot more sense if the kind of dog that we actually had on there would be a watchdog. Number two, this is a show that, while not expressly for Christians, meaning I certainly welcome non-Christians and think that this information is vital for them, it is, of course, advertised towards Christians, right? I am a conservative, but I am a fundamentalist Christian before I am a conservative. And I think that obviously bleeds into my political commentaries sometimes, right? So for those two reasons, we figured the watchdog should be a species of watchdog and also some kind of shepherd dog. So I'm going to be changing the logo a little bit to probably like a Great Pyrenees or some other sort of livestock guardian dog. But everything else around it is going to be the same. And then also I'm going to move this over to OBS, try and get it a little bit more formal, looking a lot more like, obviously not literally the Ben Shapiro show or anything like that, because he's got all of his own stuff, right? But a little bit more like that, in audio quality and video quality and all that different kind of stuff. And we'll probably, hopefully, be getting an intro here soon that is more than just simply, the countdown on StreamYard and then a little picture of my logo here, right? So all of those things, looks like we've done enough stalling for time here. I want to briefly talk about one thing before we get into articles, getting back to our pre-article discussions, because we're getting back to having multiple topics per show. And that thing which I would like to speak about today is Pornhub, actually. I know that may come as a shock to you if you're not really familiar with what I talk about here on the Watchdog, but if you are familiar, I am personally very into the anti-porn movement. And Pornhub is really at the forefront of the rhetoric from our movement for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is the largest video hosting website for pornography in the world. But number two, it has recently been caught up in some less than savory practices and allegations, including but not limited to potentially profiting from child trafficking. Now, what I want to talk about is actually incredibly good news, which is that some of those victims of child trafficking who have decided to go, to remain anonymous, so we do not have their names, right? They have actually sued the parent company of Pornhub, which is known as MindGeek. And MindGeek is a pornography distributor that, of course, is the parent company of not only Pornhub, but numerous other pornography websites and things of that nature, right? Though I, for the life of me, wouldn't be able to name them for you, right? So why is this a good thing? Well, number one, pornography in and of itself is just an evil thing, right? And I know people are saying, well, you're just using all of this stuff that's happening with Pornhub to your advantage because you don't like pornography in general. And that's almost true, but it's not quite true. What's actually happening in reality is people like myself, like Matt Walsh, like Covenant Eyes, and so on, are trying to tell you that what Pornhub is doing is kind of just the way that this industry is. This industry is degrading by its very nature. This industry is incredibly racist. This industry is an industry that preys upon youth. This industry is an industry that really likes the idea of coerced sex, so on and so forth, right? It's not like Pornhub is the first company to get in a lot of trouble over having, allegations of sex trafficking. In fact, Pornhub itself got caught because a pornography production company known as Girls Do Porn was busted literally raping women on camera and then selling it as if it was some kind of an official product, right? And they were one of the more popular companies on the, in the Pornhub lineup, and of course in other websites as well, but specifically with Pornhub, right? So it is true that we are using this to our advantage as anti-pornography activists. The thing is, though, is it's not actually, you're seeing it through the reverse lens, right? Whereas you're seeing, oh, this is a negative thing that happened to porn, therefore they're going to use this to their advantage. What's actually going on is the porn company is incredibly negative and degrading and disrespectful and abusive, and we're finally seeing evidence come to light of that. That's the number one thing that actually makes this really good. The number two thing that actually makes this a really good thing is, of course, the fact that there might actually be some justice for these women, right? These women, if they were basically kidnapped and then forced to perform sexual acts on camera so that a bunch of fat cats up in Canada could get themselves filthy, stinking rich off of titties. That's what happened, right? I mean, like, I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but that is what happened, right? That is exactly what happened. And to see, even if it is just a civil suit, I hope that we actually see some serious criminal charges come against Pornhub and numerous other companies for sex trafficking, for child sexual abuse, for child pornography. I mean, the owners of MindGeek need to be put in prison. In fact, I would like to see them executed, frankly. But we don't do that anymore. So at least put in prison for the rest of their natural lives, right? But at least something would be nice. And to see some level of justice for these girls, right? To actually be able to, even if, like I said, even if it's just monetary and getting the videos taken off of the platform, right? To at least get something out of these basically mafiosos that are currently in control of this company and indeed are in control of the entire pornography industry. And that's another thing I'd like to point out too. If you have a struggle with pornography, which I know, believe me, it is one of the biggest struggles that we can have in the modern day because it is so readily available and it calls to everything that is within us in our carnal flesh, right? I will be just straight up with you. I myself have experienced a hellacious pornography addiction in my life, right? If this is something that you struggle with, number one, remember what your God says about it. Number two, remember what it is that you are doing to these girls and potentially to a girl who you may be with. Think of that as somebody's daughter, somebody's mother, somebody's wife, so on and so forth. Number three, remember what these companies are doing to these girls. A lot of these girls are willing, sure. A lot of these girls are not. And even a lot of the girls that are willing, they preyed upon them not only when they were young, but when they were in bad situations, on drugs, in debt. Just getting out of an abusive relationship. Maybe they were just getting out of having an abusive household or something along those lines, right? And number four, hashtag not spawn, by the way, I'd like to suggest that potentially you download something like Fight the New Drug or Covenant Eyes, which does a very good job helping people to get off of this filth when they have these kinds of addictions. Read your Bibles, get something like Covenant Eyes, get some accountability, potentially somebody in the church, something like that, right? You can absolutely conquer this. And I don't mean just conquering hardcore pornography, by the way. I even mean that time when you justify in your head, you're like, oh, well, I can go watch a Cardi B music video. It's not technically porn or something like that, right? You can conquer that as well. Just because it happens to be everywhere and everything that is within you as a sexual being says to go for it, right? That actually, believe it or not, doesn't really mean anything. You do have help. You have help in Christ. You have help in other people who are around you, hopefully in your church, friends, and family. And there is also help you can find from this company, Covenant Eyes. So I'd like to suggest them to everybody. Once again, hashtag not spawn. But let's get right into the articles because we got some interesting stuff to talk about. I'm late to the party, but I would like to talk about the Canadian pastor who recently got arrested in Canada. The reason we were late to the party, of course, was for a couple of reasons. Number one, we were talking a bunch about this interfaith prayer, at which virtually nobody else is picking up on. Not literally nobody else, don't get me wrong, but virtually nobody else is picking up on. So we had to talk about that. And then, of course, I just haven't been as consistent as I've wanted to be, which is a consistent problem with this show, as longtime watchers will know. But I would definitely be, what's the word there? The word for doing something wrong. I guess it'd be malfeasance in a way, but it's not really the word I'm looking for. I would be doing something wrong is what I'm getting at if I did not actually address the situation in Canada. Real quick, I'm going to go ahead and pull this article up. So just a second. Sorry, I didn't realize that I had muted myself. So, specifically, as many of you may know, but some of you might not, Pastor James Coates in Edmonton, I believe, Canada, was arrested for COVID-19 violations. And this, of course, is not the first time that a pastor has been arrested, quote unquote, for violating COVID-19 regulations. I say quote unquote because the nature of the regulations is such that literally all they are doing is being pastors. And of course, this is not the first time this thing has happened. It's happened here in my own state of Idaho. Members of Doug Wilson's church were arrested for having an outdoor singing service. We saw Tim Remington, who was a former member of the Idaho state legislature, as well as a pastor of the Altar Church in Coeur d'Alene. He saw him get a huge amount of flack and criticism. In the end, his own board of directors ended up taking away his right as the pastor to make the decision and shut down the church for him. We, of course, had an interview with Pastor Tony Spell from Louisiana, who's kind of the first big name pastor to not only reject the COVID-19 regulations, but to have some very, very serious legal consequences as a result. He himself has even been charged not only with tons of violations of COVID-19 protocols, right, which could put him in, I think at this point he's facing upwards of 5 years in jail and huge fines, right? But on top of that, he's even been charged with false crimes that he didn't even commit in an effort to try and take him down and destroy his reputation. Like, for example, the instance of being falsely accused of assault with a deadly weapon, the deadly weapon being a bus, right? And of course, the video is actually online. You can find the video. It's very clear that Pastor Spell did not attempt to assault anybody with the bus. It's also very clear in the video that the person who's quote unquote being assaulted did not feel he was being assaulted either because he didn't even move, right? The bus stops a whole 12 feet in front of him. It's just a ridiculous claim. And of course, anybody who sees the evidence can see it. I actually suggest you go find, it's actually Non-Apologetics, not a watchdog, but you go find my own interview with Tony Spell because we showed it. And of course, everybody's familiar with the John Macarthur situation at this point because that was incredibly popular. The point being, this is not by any stretch of the imagination the first time that we have seen pastors in the West or even on the North American continent being arrested for having the audacity to simply be pastors, right? This does just so happen to be the most recent situation. It does happen to be a situation that appears a little bit worse than Tony Spell's situation or John Macarthur's situation. However, it is absolutely not the first time. It will not be the last time. It will not be the worst time. I can guarantee you all of these things just simply by looking at the trends, barring a Holy Spirit-filled and, dare I say, miraculous revival. There is absolutely no way that things don't get worse from here. Okay, so I just want everybody to be clear on that. But nonetheless, let's go into this article. It's from Christianity Today. Kate Shellnutt is the writer. And it's a couple weeks old at this point, but like I said, I'm a little bit late to the party as far as commenting on Pastor Coates. So that is why actually we have this a little bit late here. Oh, I see. So I see Brother Nicholas and Honesty Angel are here. Shalom to both of you. And I also see that Spooky Bedhair had to leave. Well, I hope you are able to come back at some point. And by the way, I appreciate you guys who decide to be interactive in here in the chat. Obviously, not everybody has to, but it's always cool being able to interact with some of the same people. But nonetheless, authorities found his church continued to meet as normal over months rather than comply with capacity, mask, and distancing regulations. Once again, authorities found that his church continued to meet as normal over months rather than comply with capacity, mask, and distancing regulations. Canadian pastor arrested for violating public health orders remains in police custody after refusing the conditions of his bail, that he stop holding service that defy COVID-19 regulations. Yes, you heard that correctly. The judge literally ordered this man, you need to stop preaching or we're going to keep you here in prison. And because this man is a hero, not only for the Canadian people and for Western civilization and for liberty itself, but specifically for the Christian faith, right? He said, no, of course I'm not going to do this. You don't have a right to tell me that I cannot preach, not because of your law, not because of some esoteric or philosophical ideas of human liberty, not because of some natural law. No, because God himself commands me to preach this message to every living creature. Sorry, the answer is no, right? That is exactly what he should have done. Let me just be perfectly clear right now. I understand that people have their own opinions on this situation. If you believe that the government is right in this situation, your opinion is false. It's just factually false. I'm not here to pull punches about it, right? And frankly, it's not Christian. I'm not saying you're not a Christian. I am saying that opinion is not Christian, okay? We should not have been shutting down at all, right? We have a mandate from the Lord to meet and to preach this gospel, to meet with like-minded believers, to have fellowship with each other, and to preach this gospel, right? Those are mandates from God. So there's no option here as to like, well, the Romans 13 talks about following the state, right? Romans 13 does not talk about following the state when it means you stop following God. In fact, Paul himself lost his head because he decided to defy the state when they told him to stop following God, right? So you just don't have a right, if you're going to claim to be a Christian, to say, no, we have to listen to the state here. No, we have to, quote unquote, love our neighbor and not try to get people sick. Think of the children, think of the elders, all that kind of stuff. I'm sorry, it's not up for dispute. Okay. Now we can, if there's actually legitimate concerns about those things, we can talk about those things. We can talk about what is the best way to keep the elders safe. What is the best way to keep the children safe? What is the best way to make sure that we are minimizing contact so that we don't actually have this disease spreading? That's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. Thousands of churches across the country are doing that and still meeting in person. And again, it's not up for dispute. Okay. Again, I'm not saying you're a Christian if you disagree with me. I am saying, though, that this disagreement, you're not on the Christian side. Okay. Period. And you're certainly not on any sort of a conservative side if conservatism is meant to show some level of respect, not only for traditional institutions, but also for economic and social liberty via the Constitution, right? Let me just point that out. The case of Grace Life Church Pastor James Coates has reignited a religious freedom debate over worship gatherings during government lockdowns. Grace Life Church in Edmonton, after shifting to live streams for the first few months of the pandemic, resumed worship over the summer and has met every Sunday without incident, it says. And I admire that they decided to eventually tell the government, no, I'm sorry, we're going to meet in the name of the Lord. I'd like to point out Pastor Tony Spell never shut down his church, and to this day still has not had a single issue. I do believe there was one person who died with COVID, but it is important to note that not only does this man have thousands of people attending his church every Thursday, as well as every Wednesday, as well as every Sunday, twice, right? But on top of that, this person did not die from COVID. They died with COVID and were only one single individual. So I still would argue that that is without incident. If somebody has a cough but dies in a car crash, obviously the cough did not kill them, right? So it's important to make that distinction. Tony Spell still, unless you want to count that incident, you could say one incident, right? I would argue without incident, never shut down, never mask mandated. Took precautions, of course, never shut down, no mask mandates. Not to like use Tony Spell to one up Pastor Coates or anything like that. The point being that this is a kind of a farce, really, I guess is what I'm getting at, right? The idea that you need to shut down churches because if you don't, they're going to be super spreader events. Tony Spell's proven that's not true because he never shut down at any point in time. And he runs a massive church. My church has like 50 people in it, right? Maybe like 75 on like a good day. You know what I'm saying? Like this dude had 2,000 people in his building at one point in time, no incidents. You know what I'm saying? On a bad day, he gets between 600 and 800. And that's typically on things on like Thursdays when most people aren't actually showing up. Your Sundays are obviously always going to be your biggest as far as the population of the congregation is concerned, right? No incident. The point being, Tony Spell has proven definitively, I think, as has John Macarthur. And even though they came late to the party, as has Pastor Coates, they have proven definitively that churches do not operate the way the media is trying to fearmonger them as operating, right? As far as with this disease, excuse me. But look back to the article. But authorities repeatedly flagged the church for not capping attendance at 15% of capacity, requiring masks or social distancing as required by health regulations in Alberta. Grace Life has been fined $1,200 in December. And this month, officers found the church again in violation and issued an undertaking requiring Coates to comply. When the church met as usual last Sunday, as they should, they called for his arrest. Coates was preaching on Romans 13:1-4, a message titled Directing the Government to Its Duty. I would actually like to hear that. That sounds like it would be a pretty solid. I don't know anything about the theology or anything like that of Pastor Coates. And I know that not everybody who's defied these lockdowns is somebody who I support in that sense. Like, for example, Rodney Howard Brown, I think is his name, in Florida, is kind of a weirdo, but he was one of the ones who was not, gonna, back down when it came to shutting down, at least at first, until eventually he was forced to. I still think he shouldn't have, but the point is I was obviously supporting him when he was doing that, even though I very much disagree with his prosperity theology and all that. That's not the point. Religious freedom is the point, right? Although it is worthy of note, right? That man did end up caving. Tony Spell, James Coates, Tim Remington, right? Those men did not. In other words, those who are sticking to the fundamentals of the Bible are going in a certain direction. That should tip you off to something. I'm not going to say what. I'd like you to figure it out for yourself, but it should tip you off to this thing that you should have already figured out for yourself. Ultimately, Coates turned himself in on Tuesday and was arrested on charges of contravening the Public Health Act and refusing the undertaking, the CBC reported. He was has twice refused to agree to the conditions of his release, the network said. The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, which is representing Coates and Grace Life, said the pastor, quote, could not in good conscience agree to, end quote, stop holding church services as ordered. And let me just say amen and full support for the brother. And by the way, those of you who are out there, please do be praying for Pastor Coates and for his congregation. And indeed, for pastors everywhere, right? Because this isn't just censorship, of speech. This is actually going after the pastors themselves, putting them in jail for having the audacity to lead in churches, right? It's one thing if somebody shuts down like David Wood or your favorite apologist, right? It's one thing if Alex Jones is shut down. Those are terrible things, but they're not this, right? This is a level of tyranny that we're not really used to in the United States because it frankly hasn't occurred for most of us in the United States. But it's coming, right? And it's coming stronger. And frankly, the same would be true in Canada, but you could already see that, it's kind of a little bit already there in Canada, right? And it kind of is here too. I mean, Tony Spell, John Macarthur had to deal with some stuff, right? But nonetheless, the commander of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in the country said in a statement that it has escalated from, quote, education and opportunity, for compliance, and lastly, enforcement, end quote, in regards to Grace Life, and its objective, quote, is not to interrupt church services, prohibit services, nor deny people's right to practice their religion, merely to ensure that public health restrictions are adhered to while doing so, end quote. It's interesting that's always going to be the excuse people use for violating people's liberties, especially religious liberties, right? Think of the communist Chinese right now. And they're saying it's not that we hate Christians. It's not that we want to get rid of Islam. We just want it to be more in line with the Chinese state's version, right? We just want to maintain order, guys. It has nothing to do with your religion. Caesar did the same thing. No, it's not that we hate Jesus. You can totally worship Jesus. Just confess that Caesar is Lord. That's it. Right? This is what they always do. This is the method that these kinds of people, these tyrants, use to try and make themselves feel justified. And there's a famous quote from the Christian theologian and writer C.S. Lewis that says, there is no worse tyrant than that who tyrannizes with the conscience of his own heart, or with the good conscience of his own heart, right? Excuse me. It's the same thing, right? This is what they always are going to try and do. Because, no, it's only for your freedom. And we're not really restricting you. You can play along. Doesn't Jesus say to love your neighbor and follow the whims of the frickin' state? I'm sure you can tell I'm a little irritated about this kind of stuff, but I'm not gonna. I basically like gone into a ranting sesh on every single one of my last episodes, so I'm trying not to today. But just pointing out, this is the way that these tyrants operate, right? The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms protects freedom of conscience and religion as a fundamental freedom. I guess somebody should remind the Canadian government of that, but nonetheless. But it also acknowledges the possibility of reasonable limits in the law, quote, as can be demonstrably justified, in a free and democratic society, which, of course, is very vague language that the government is currently using to its advantage. Like John Macarthur and Grace Community Church in California, which resumed in-person worship against state regulations in July, Coates and Grace Life have continued to meet to stand against what they see as unjustifiable regulations on their religious freedoms and, more broadly, civil liberties. Quote, I'm doing what I'm doing in obedience to Christ. I'm quite content to let the Lord Jesus Christ himself decide whether or not this is persecution, end quote, Coates said in the February 14th sermon, according to the Edmonton Journal. Quote, he promises that those who are persecuted for his name's sake will be blessed. He's the one that blesses, and I'm content to leave that in his court. And there's a picture of Pastor Coates there. And of course, I completely agree with him, right? Here, this tweet says Pastor James Coates held a in-church service on February 14th. RCMP asked him to turn himself in yesterday, which he did. He is now being held in jail unless he commits to cease holding church services. He could not, in good conscience, agree to this condition. And praise the Lord for pastors and leaders like Pastor James Coates. I mean that sincerely. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, Kenney, issued a statement Thursday after the Justice Center petitioned him to revoke the health regulations, which he says unfairly discriminate against houses of worship. Quote, the suggestion that Alberta has any restrictions on preaching is completely false. Under Alberta law, no one has been or will be fined or sanctioned for preaching, end quote, Kenney wrote on Facebook. Quote, anybody in Alberta can preach their faith, and their religious communities are encouraged to gather in congregational worship within the safe guidelines laid out by Alberta Health, end quote. Once again, that same thing I was just telling you about, right? It has nothing to do with you confessing Jesus as Lord. We just want you also to confess Caesar as Lord. Can you do that for us? Right? No, see, nobody's ever been arrested for confessing Jesus as Lord. We just want you to also fall under the parameters as laid out by the Roman state and blah, 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 blah. Vomit profusely coming out of these people's mouths as if it were actually logic. Kenney described attending Ash Wednesday services this week and applauded, quote, thousands of congregations, end quote, in the province who are complying with the public health guidelines. It's interesting that Pastor James White, Dr. James White, whatever you decide to call him, pointed out on his dividing line 3 or 4 months ago, something along those lines, that those people who actually are betraying the Christian faith and the rest of their Christian brothers by going along with the state, they are going to be used by the state as, see, you can do it. You can follow our guidelines. See, they did it. Right? And what do you know? Less than half a year, James White turns out to be prophetic. And of course, I'm joking. He's not literally a prophet. But the point being, that's exactly true. It's exactly true. Right? Whenever they look at the fact that the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church shut down their churches all across the world, or the fact that your local Methodist body just decided they were going to have nothing but in-person services for the last year and a half, right? They look at that and they think to themselves, see, you can do it. And therefore, these people who are actually insisting that they follow the scriptures, these people are just being knuckle draggers. These people are just being radical, extreme, fundamentalist, whatever they're going to call you. Frankly, I'll wear the titles with pride. But at any rate, Grace Life issued a 1,600-word statement suggesting the response to the pandemic has been overblown. And, quote, the negative effects of the government lockdown measures on society far surpass the effects of COVID-19, end quote. I think that is obviously 100% accurate. But of course, what's new? I've only said that 3 million times over the last year, right? The church's lawyer, James Kitchen, said, quote, their first loyalty is to obey their God, not government. Oh, he says their God. I wonder if he's not a Christian. Anyways, they're committed to gathering as they always have for in-person worship services, end quote. The province says it has allowed the churches and others to continue to gather according to current public health orders. Coates' next court date is Wednesday, February 24th, which, of course, is already passed at this point. As I said, I am a little bit late to the party here. And, of course, the reason being that, like I said, we were talking a whole bunch about everything that was going on in and, of course, that took up most of my time. But nonetheless, I mean, there you have it, right? But let's recall, this is not the first and only situation where this has occurred. We see our good friend of the channel, Nicholas, here in the live chat. In his own state, that tyrannical governor, Gavin Newsom, barred churches from singing, barred churches from in-person services, tried to go after Pastor John Macarthur. A lot of people thought that he might end up being arrested. Thank the Lord he did not actually end up having to spend a significant amount of time in jail. I don't know if he spent any time in jail at all, actually. But nonetheless, that's here in the States that stuff was happening, banning in-person services, banning people from actually singing in church, going after popular churches to make an example of them, right? Louisiana, I was just pointing out, Pastor Tony Spell, right? Louisiana is even kind of conservative sometimes. Its current governor is a Democratic governor, but, a lot of people would consider the state of Louisiana to be conservative politically, to be socially conservative, to be constitutionally minded, and more importantly, to be a state in the Bible Belt. And yet Tony Spell is one of the most persecuted religious figures in recent American memory, right? And again, check out our interview with Tony Spell on Unapologetics if you are interested in knowing a little bit about that case, as well as different watchdogs where we've talked about it if you want to search through that. My own state of Idaho, one of the most read and religiously devout states in the entire country, has gone after at least 4 pastors that I know of. Right? At least 4 pastors that I know of. I've already mentioned what happened with Doug Wilson's singing service and Pastor Tim Remington's service. The other 2 are smaller congregations, so I'm not going to name them for their own anonymity's sake, right? Didn't necessarily get all up in the news, right? Excuse me. But the point is that this is happening in the States, even in some of the most conservative areas. And while it's not quite as bad as what's going on with Pastor James Coates, it's still bad. It is still very, very bad. And it's only going to get worse, my friends. It is only going to get worse. And in case you guys are wondering, Pastor Coates is still in jail. His next court date is, I think, in May, or at least the trial will run until May. May 3rd through 5th, right? But he's still in jail because he still refuses to comply with the state order to shut down his church. And all for it, right? I am 100% in support of this man. And frankly, let me be clear, if your pastor is not willing not only to stand up with Pastor Coates, but also to stand up when the state when they come for your church, you need to find a new pastor. It's only my opinion. I'm a almost 23-year-old kid with, no elder experience in a church. So take it with a grain of salt, if you will. But I think you guys know I'm right at least on this one, right? Nonetheless, that's all we have about Pastor Coates, at least. But there is a lot of other stuff to be talking about. I see some other folks here with us. Mitchell and Garu Lady, shalom. Thank you, both of you, for showing up here today. There was somebody else I thought I saw here. Yeah, there he is, Richard Neal. Richard Neal, he says, I believe Coates is reformed. Well, also, thank you for that information. And thank you for being here as well. Shalom. Just wanted to say a quick hi to everybody. But our second topic that we're going to talk about is abortion bans. There's bad stuff happening in the United States. There's also stuff that might be kind of a little bit of a good thing. We'll see how far it ends up going. But at least on the surface, it appears pretty swell. And that is, there are some abortion bans coming up again in certain states, namely Texas and Arkansas, Arkansas being the one that's in the news. Excuse me. But I've, of course, titled this segment, Abortion Bans the Sane Say Yes, because obviously we should be banning the slaughter of innocent children in the womb. I already mentioned Nicholas here in the chat. He has often pointed out that abortion is a euphemism that is used in a way to desensitize people from the subject matter. What's actually going on here is the slaughter of unborn babies in the womb. And actually, even myself, I just used the term abortion. It would behoove us all, including me, to start referring to abortion in that way, because that is what it is, right? At any rate, some good news, maybe, kind of, right? I say maybe and kind of because we don't know how far this will actually go. But this appears to be good news. And since we just had a lot of pretty depressing news, I think it's nice to get some good news. So this is from the National Review. The writer of this article is Alexandra DeSantis. And the article is titled, Arkansas Enacts an Abortion Ban Aimed at Overturning Roe. Yeah, buddy. A near total abortion ban that, of course, will be challenged and will be taken to the Supreme Court at some point in time, unless the Supreme Court decides they are unwilling to hear it. Now, real quick, I'd like to point out, I do not actually have a whole lot of faith in our current Supreme Court, so I don't know that this will actually end up accomplishing anything, which is why I'm a little bit cautious about saying this is good news. It may end up being a nothing burger, right? But it may also end up being an incredibly important step towards potentially ending one of the greatest evils in the history of the modern world. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Yesterday, Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson signed a bill into law that bans nearly all abortions in the state, a move that the legislator hopes will eventually lead to the Supreme Court overturning its Roe v. Wade decision and subsequent abortion decisions. The Arkansas bill, known as the Unborn Child Protection Act, would prohibit all abortions except to save the life of a pregnant woman in a medical emergency. And I would point out, by the way, that when you are saving a woman's life in a medical emergency, you can do that. And technically, yes, you're, quote, aborting the pregnancy, right? But you're not usually killing the child, right? Any doctor will tell you that if at all possible in these situations, they are attempting to save both of the lives. Unfortunately, sometimes it is not possible. We live in a fallen world, and sometimes you do have to make a decision of which life you're going to actually save, right? Frankly, the child's life is not viable without the mother. So it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to choose the mother or choose the child over the mother in that situation. But you can ask any doctor about this who has to deal with these situations. The goal is to save them both. It is not to terminate the pregnancy in the way that y'all mean it. It's to terminate the pregnancy in the sense that the woman is, no longer pregnant, right? But the child is still alive. In fact, an awful lot of times, this is the reason why you need something like a cesarean section, right? Is because there's going to be complications with the birth that could potentially damage either the child or the mother. But at any rate, in the context of the legislation, a medical emergency is defined as a situation in which a pregnant woman's life is life is endangered by a physical disorder, physical illness, or physical injury, including a life-endangering physical condition caused by or arising from the pregnancy itself. I want to point out that it says including, not explicitly. So in other words, it's saying that abortion would be okay if there is a physical disorder, a physical illness, or a physical injury in the woman, and that included in this, but not exclusively in this, is a life-endangering physical condition caused by or arising from the pregnancy itself. And again, as I kind of just pointed out with my little point there about how you want to save both of the lives, I do think that is even still conceding too much to the rhetoric of the pro-choice crowd. Okay. We all recognize that there will be situations where there's nothing the doctor can do, right? That's a fact. We get it, right? But that's not what anybody is talking about when they're talking about abortion. You know it. I know it. We know it. Let's move on and be honest with each other, can't we? Anyways, while bills such as this one often face scrutiny for failing to allow abortion when the pregnant mother was the victim of rape or incest, some pro-lifers say that such exceptions undermine the coherence of the pro-life case. If abortion is wrong and should be illegal because it takes a human life, it remains wrong when that human life came into being through an act of violence. That is exactly accurate. I will not at any point in time say that I don't have sympathy for women who conceive during rape. I would point out that I would be willing to actually have a conversation more so with that person, like if that person was willing to concede to me that the other 99.9%, and it's a little tiny bit of an exaggeration, it's more like 99.1, but nonetheless, that all of those abortions were wrong. If this person could concede with me that all of those abortions were wrong and we could just have a conversation with that, it'd be much more easy on my part to sympathize, right? Since that's virtually never what's actually happening, since it's usually well, this tiny, tiny fraction of abortions is due to rape, therefore all of these other abortions, right? It's hard for me to take that seriously and sympathize with that at all, right? But despite my sympathies, there is no logic in murdering the child who had nothing to do with it because of a rape. And in an incest, it's even worse, right? Because barring an act of coercion, or which we would call rape, fun fact, incest, that could end up being a pretty broad topic considering how, unfortunately, sexually diverse we are, could you say, in the modern society, right? I mean, how long is it until brother-sister relationships are kind of normal in the United States? Let's be honest about that, right? Let honestly consider to yourself, right? Think of the transgender movement. Think of the desexualization or the deprotection of minors in the case of giving them sexual education, and in the case of making it okay to sleep with 14-year-olds in numerous states and all that kind of stuff, right? Think of how polygamy is becoming popular again. Think of all these different things, homosexuality, transgenderism, all that, right? How long is it, honestly, until we're accepting, quote unquote, loving incestuous relationships, right? It's right around the corner. We all know it. Lawrence Krauss, the atheist apologist and professor from Arizona State University, famously defended such as long as a decade ago when he was debating William Lane Craig. A decade ago, my friends. So this is something that's right around the corner. And if we're allowing abortion for cases of incest just because these parents are perverts, right? They're perverted, right? Therefore, they're allowed to kill their child. That could end up being incredibly problematic for a couple of reasons, right? Number one, we don't know how big that problem will end up getting as far as how many people are actually partaking in that filth. Number two, this is really the important part, right? If a 22-year-old adult and a 24-year-old adult who happen to be related willingly and consensually conceive, the child has done nothing wrong. The child has done nothing wrong. The incest itself is wrong. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But the child has done nothing wrong and does not deserve the punishment of their parents' disgusting actions. Okay, I know this is weird to talk about, but it's true. It is true. Okay, and the same thing applies with rape. The same thing applies with rape. Okay, it is not the child's fault. The child has done nothing wrong. If you want to give the child up for adoption or something along those lines, that's fine. I know everybody says the foster system is terrible. Believe me, I know. Believe me, okay? I know. I'm actually one of the people who wants to try and do something about it. I guarantee you all you pro-choicers are not. I almost promise you that none of y'all are doing a damn thing about it or planning to do a damn thing about it. I, however, am. So believe me, I know that the adoption system is cruddy. You know what's more cruddy? Being dead, okay? At least people in the adoption system have the right to life. But no, the child should not be punished, I'm sorry, for the debauchery of its parents in the form of incest, nor the disgusting way in which it was conceived by its father in the form of rape. Sorry, it's just not the way it should work. Child did nothing wrong. Somebody else did something wrong, punish that somebody else. And I don't have a problem with punishing somebody else, right? No problem at all. But anyways, moving on. Meanwhile, the bill's sponsors hope that even though their legislation is sure to be blocked in court, it might take its way to the Supreme Court and serve as a vehicle for overturning Roe, which, of course, is my great hope. Quote, the state of Arkansas urgently pleads with the United States Supreme Court to do the right thing, as they did in one of their greatest cases, Brown versus the Board of Education, which overturned a 58-year-old precedent of the United States and reverse, cancel, overturn, and annul Roe v. Wade, Doe v. Bolton, and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, end quote, the bill text reads. The bill also states that it is designed, quote, to ensure that abortion in Arkansas is abolished and to protect the lives of the unborn children, end quote. The law is intended not only as a possible means of undoing Roe, but also as a trigger law for the state of Arkansas. If the court were to roll back parts of its abortion jurisprudence, even aside from considering the Arkansas ban, it might allow states to regulate abortion more than is currently permitted. In such circumstances, this bill would ensure that most abortions immediately become illegal in Arkansas. According to a report from the pro-abortion Guttmacher Institute, it's actually probably Guttmacher Institute, but nonetheless, state legislators have introduced more than 300 bills to protect the unborn since the start of the new legislative term this year. And that's another thing I would just like to ask everybody, please pray for, right? Potentially, we might actually see the end of abortion in this country. Who knows? Unlikely, but if we do, that would be fantastic. And of course, our sovereign God is capable of anything. So absolutely pray for this to occur. And real quick, I want to go ahead and move on because there's a couple other things to talk about. Although, one of those other things to talk about is more abortion stuff. Bill filed by GOP lawmaker tries to make getting an abortion a capital offense. This is from the Dallas Morning News. As filed by Representative Brian Slayton, this bill would abolish abortion and raise the possibility of the death penalty for women who get one, and criminal charges for physicians who do the procedure. Personally, I think that is reversed in order. I would prosecute the be prosecuting the women with, certainly heavy charges, but the one who's actually committing the murder is the abortionist. So if anybody's going to have the death penalty on their head, it would be the abortionist, right? To sort of give an example, if a woman were to give her child away to somebody who just had a fetish for killing children, right? She would certainly have some heavy criminal charges against her, but technically the person who actually committed the crime here is the murderer, right? So obviously if there's a capital offense in question, it should be on their head. So I think the order here in the bill is a little reversed. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and read. Go ahead and zoom in a little bit for you guys here in case you were wanting to read along. North Texas Republican State Representative Brian Slayton introduced a bill on Tuesday that would not only abolish abortion, but also allow the death penalty for women and physicians who carry out the procedure. See, that makes more sense to have it applying at least to the physicians. Like I said, having it for one and not the other, it just wouldn't make any sense. But if it's both and, that at least does make some level of sense, I guess is my point. The bill, House Bill 3326, would leave women who get an abortion and physicians who deliver them open to assault or homicide charges, which is a capital offense, and has no exceptions for rape and incest, as the Texas Tribune first reported. And indeed, I do definitely believe that they should be, especially the physicians, as I just said, should absolutely be charged with homicide. I am not really opposed, personally, to the, I was at one point in time, I'll be honest with you. I don't think I am anymore opposed to the idea of death penalty for abortionists. I'm really not. I mean, obviously, the more you think about it, like, well, would you give the death penalty to child murderers? It's like, well, obviously, duh. Why would I not? Unless I'm just against the death penalty in general, right? Well, it's the same thing, is it not? It's the exact same thing. It is the literal exact same thing. In fact, that's the entire pro-life argument. The entire pro-life argument. So if you're down with the death penalty, if you think that murdering children is a heinous enough crime that people should be given the death penalty for it, or at least that it should be considered, and you're pro-life, that logically must apply to abortionists. There's just no getting around it. Listed as an exemption are ectopic, or ectopic, I'm pretty sure it's ectopic, but whatever, pregnancies that seriously threaten the life of the mother. I already went on my rant about that, so we're not going to do it again. Quote, when a reasonable alternative to save the lives of both the mother and the unborn child is unavailable, end quote. And of course, no need to go into it because the bill kind of goes on my little rant for me. Today, I filed HB 3326 to abolish abortions in Texas. This is Brian Slayton's tweet. The bill will end the discriminatory practice of terminating the life of innocent children and will guarantee the equal protection of the laws to all Texans, no matter how small. And then it just has a quote of that same thing. The bill banning abortion at fertilization would also allow the Attorney General to monitor the state's enforcement and direct a, quote, state agency to enforce those laws, regardless of any contrary federal statute, regulation, treaty, order, or court decision, end quote. Which is, in my opinion, the real cool part about this law, is they're saying, hey, look, we don't actually care if Roe v. Wade is not overturned. We're going to enforce this anyways. Kick rocks. And that is exactly what states need to be doing. People did it with pot. People do it with illegal immigrants. You can do it with the life of the unborn child, okay? It's not that difficult. Just say, hey, feds, bye. I'm sorry, you don't have any jurisdiction here. Get out. Shoo. Go bother somebody else. I'm not interested in dealing with your bogus nonsense. Literally, people did this with marijuana. And I don't have a problem with that. This may come as a shock to some of you guys, but I'm actually pro-legalization of marijuana. I think it's a little ridiculous to arrest people for smoking weed when we have legalized sugar and caffeine and alcohol and cigarettes, all of which are much more detrimental to your health, which, by the way, is not an endorsement of smoking pot. You should not smoke pot. It is a drug, but nonetheless. But the point is, I don't think that it's justified in any way, shape, or form for people to be sitting here saying, yeah, no, we can tell the government to kick rocks when it comes to weed. I really, really want to smoke this doob, bro. And so, therefore, the federal government needs to get out and get out of my business. But you can't do it with the unborn. Where do your convictions truly lie? Anyways, Texans who are dealing with the compounding consequences, of several crises deserve, quote, real leadership, end quote, said Amy Arambide, executive director of Avow, a nonprofit working to secure unrestricted abortion access for Texans. So, in other words, a filthy, stinking child murderer. No disrespect, Miss Arambide, but also all of the disrespect. Arambide added that Texans deserve expanded access to health care, which includes abortion, rather than cheap political shots. And let me say, if this is just a cheap political shot, because I know the GOP is quite fond of talking a lot about abortion and then doing absolutely nothing about it, then, of course, I would have a problem with it. But, I don't actually think this is the case. I think this person is serious. I think he's putting forward this bill because he thinks it could get passed. I think that it would be very good if it did get passed. I would like to see more states telling the government to just, I'm sorry, we're not going to listen to you. It's that simple. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution gives us the right to make our own laws unless the laws here unless the methods for you passing those laws and controlling that, right, are explicitly laid out in the Constitution. Anything that's not explicitly laid out in the Constitution, we, the states, retain the rights, period. That's what it says. That's what we're doing. Bye. Right? It's that simple. It is literally that simple. What are they going to do? Invade Texas? And to be fair, who knows? Maybe they would. But at that point, what hill are you willing to die on, I guess? I'm personally not willing to be a member of a nation or to have loyalty to a nation that would actually invade another state for having the audacity to protect the life of the unborn. If the United States ever did that, I can tell you, yesterday, I will be disavowing my citizenship, right? Obviously, that hasn't happened, but just being clear, right? So what do we have next? How long have we been going? We've been going an hour solid. I wanted to talk about Francis and Joe. 2 peas in the pod. But perhaps that's not the best idea. Real quick, I see this this question from Guru, or this comment from Guru Lady. If you try to ban sugar, caffeine, or cigarettes, you would have some serious protests and stuff. I'm surprised we didn't have run on cigarettes like when we did with TP or ramen or noodles. To be fair, that's totally true. I do think the point still stands, though. Those things are immensely detrimental to your health and incredibly addictive. It doesn't really make any sense to put somebody in jail for smoking a doobie when you can go, get yourself type 2 diabetes at the age of 32 by picking out on donuts. You know what I mean? Which, again, is not an endorsement of smoking weed, but nonetheless. Well, you know what, guys? I think we're going to actually end this because it is about an hour. These are only supposed to be an hour. If I talk about the other things we're going to talk about, this will get up to an hour 30, potentially 2 hours. So I think this is going to be a good place to stop. So I guess we'll have to save that stuff for Monday. I apologize. Frankly, I should have had an episode on Wednesday, which would have allowed us enough time to talk about all of this, but your boy sucks. So I apologize. But thank you guys very much for watching this, of course. I appreciate, of course, the view. Viewing this all the way or most of the way through is literally the single best thing you can do to help me in the algorithm. So I appreciate that greatly. If you have not already, please do like and please do share. Please do get this video out to all of your different social media platforms, which you happen to partake in. Of course, what good is a message without an audience to hear it? I do like to say, hopefully I'll famously say that. Excuse me. What else was I going to say? Yeah, of course, please do like, please do share. Please do subscribe if you have not done so, right? We certainly do appreciate anybody subscribing. Go ahead and hit that bell if you want to get notified every time we're going live. We are going to have Watchdogs on here for about another month, but they're going to start eventually. They're going to go from being the shows to being a watch party to not being on the synagogue at all as we phase Watchdogs out and onto their own politically oriented channel where we have separation of unapologetics and Watchdog, right? That said, of course, that's going to come with a sort of a rebranding and everything like that. So we'll see what exactly plays out with a slightly different logo, intro, some OBS stuff. It'll be good. You guys will like it. But nonetheless, please do like and share to get, subscribe to get notifications, not only of that, but also of these videos while they still are here. And of course, of all my unapologetics stuff, as well as debates and open rooms. And if any of you are interested in helping me make this into a career and get this message out to the greater population, if you think that my work is worth it, please do check out my Patreon. I just threw it there in the live chat, of course. Anything that you guys can contribute does help. There is no limit, so you can give as much as you want. You can also give as little as you want. It's literally up to you, and it's all up to what you think I deserve. So if you think I deserve nothing, or if you don't have the means or feel led or anything like that, don't feel pressured. If you do feel that this kind of work is the kind of work that should actually be turned into a career, please do consider partnering with us. And of course, I appreciate anything there that you guys are willing to do. And I think that's just about it. We'll be back here with another episode for you on Monday. And of course, we'll probably have some unapologetics in between those times, at least an open room. I guess I'm not really sure. But before we leave, actually, hang on. I noticed some things here in the comments. Synagogue, can you talk to me today? I will not be able to today, Brother Nicholas. I will be working here in about, maybe. I guess I work at 3, and I do have something to do till about 1 my time. So actually, probably. 1 o'clock my time, noon your time might work for me. If that works for you, go ahead and shoot me an email, and we'll talk. I appreciate you reaching out to me with that. At any rate, though, I appreciate you guys. Shalom. As I leave here, I do have one last question for you. In the face of Armageddon, Will you compromise?